Um, we have a distinguished panel of discussants today, and I'd like to introduce them in no particular order. First, I'd like to introduce Chinyere Princess Ofo. She's engineer Chinyere, by the way. She's a contracts engineer with ExxonMobil, and she has a thriving career that sees her developing proactive tools that enable service delivery within budget and schedule. Prior to her current role, she was an execution planning engineer with ExxonMobil. She's got multiple years of experience, also industry experience spanning petroleum engineering, project management, business development, and contracts and procurement. She is currently a PhD candidate in petroleum economics, management, and policy at Emerald Energy Institute in Nigeria. She has a master's degree in petroleum engineering and project development from the Institute of Petroleum Studies in Port Harcourt, and a bachelor's degree in petroleum engineering from Covenant University, Nigeria. And the next guest I will introduce is Dr. Abubakar Abbas, who is a chartered engineer with the Engineering Council UK under the Institution of Gas Engineers and Managers UK. He's a PhD graduate in gas engineering, a fellow of Higher Education Academy with over 15 years combined industry academic experience. He has a passion for research in the field of gas pipelines, gas network code, carbon capture and utilization, hydrogen fuel combustion and utilization, enhanced gas recovery, natural gas processing and treatment. Also gas pipelines, LNG facilities, flow assurance, process design, process simulation and troubleshooting. He has some substantial on-the-job experience as a process and pipeline engineer at Trans-Sahara Gas Pipeline Project with Wally Parsons, ExxonMobil, major integrity projects. Also the Escravos Lagos Pipeline Project, the AKK Pipeline Project, as well as on-the-job experience in process modeling using Olga, Promax, Aspen, HiSeas, and many other softwares used in the engineering industry. He's a leading international researcher, and he's leading international research collaborating with OPEC, knowledge transfer partnerships in different areas of energy transition. He has graduated about 6 PhD students in different fields of gas and petroleum engineering. He's currently the program leader of the MSc Petroleum and Gas Engineering at the University of Salford, Manchester, UK, and is a consultant in many gas engineering projects across the globe. Now, to start the discussions, I will give an introductory presentation on climate change, which gives us a foundational base of knowledge upon which everything else we discuss will be laid. Then we'll have Engineer Chinyere Ofo to take us through her presentation, and Dr. Abbas will give us his presentation on the overview of carbon capture. My name is Afolabi Davidson. As a member of the Energy Training Center, Energy Advisory Services, my foundational knowledge of the space started with the oil and gas industry and moved to the power industry and then renewable energy and then gas. I quickly realized that energy drives global industrialization and civilization. So I started researching the subject of energy transition because it became the zeitgeist of the season for anyone working in the energy sector. And I later did a course with the University of Edinburgh that was the most eye-opening course for me, where I realized that the driver of the energy transition initiative is climate change. So I would like to share my screen with you to show a couple of slides that gives us an intro into the subject matter at hand. So I'm not sure, can everyone see my slides, my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, this first slide that I want to show you is talking about the carbon cycle, and it sort of underscores what happens with the carbon cycle. So many of us are aware from undergraduate or even maybe secondary education about the carbon cycle in the biosphere, where plants take in carbon dioxide from the air, and in return, they emit oxygen. The carbon dioxide is used by the plants to build their leaves and their stems. Now, these plants are eaten by herbivorous animals, who in turn are eaten by carnivorous animals. And the carnivorous animals, but actually all animals use oxygen. They breathe in oxygen for metabolism and emit carbon dioxide, breathe out carbon dioxide. So the cycle is complete. The carbon dioxide taken in by the plants eventually ends up in animals who emit the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So this is called the biospheric cycle. The biospheric cycle is a larger part of another cycle. And there are three different cycles here. So there's the cycle that has the atmosphere, the ocean, and goes back to the atmosphere. So there's another carbon cycle surrounding that. There's also the cycle, which is a bigger one. It's the geosphere, where carbon that exists in the various rocks in the earth. And some school of thought has said that the carbon that exists in the geosphere is 2,000 times that which already exists in the ocean, the atmosphere, and the biosphere combined. If you look at the graphic here on the screen, you'll see that there is a lot of the carbon that's emitted by human activity, which we take from the Earth's crust through fossil fuels, and then we burn through a combustion process. Emits up to 7.7 petagrams of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Compare that with the amount of carbon dioxide that is emitted by volcanoes, which is about 0.1 petagrams. So this human activity actually throws off the carbon balance that exists in the atmosphere. You'll hear more about this from our expert presenters. The next slide I want to show you shows a graph of the carbon dioxide that's emitted into the atmosphere. This graph actually comes from the the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which is the United Nations agency that's been charged with providing scientific data for climate challenge, the climate issues. And on the x-axis, you see the amount of carbon that's emitted into the atmosphere, while that's the y-axis. And then the x-axis actually shows, the y-axis shows the temperature of the average temperature of the globe, and the x-axis shows the amount of carbon that has been emitted. So you'll see from inception, from 1800, the amount of carbon dioxide that's been emitted into the atmosphere till as at the time this was published. So it has from 1850 to 1900. And the black line shows the level of carbon dioxide that's emitted into the atmosphere until the current date. The other lines are projections of the amount of carbon dioxide we will emit into the atmosphere based on different scenarios. Now, at the bottom of that graph, you'll see a graphic of the various bars that shows the projections of carbon dioxide that will be emitted into the atmosphere from 2020 to 2050. You can look at the graph. It shows from 2020, the amount of carbon that we've already emitted into the atmosphere is in the range of about 2,500 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And the United Nations framework on Convention on the Climate Change, particularly from the COP26 event that took place in Scotland, they have two goals. That is to reduce the global warming, that is the global temperature, to not more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And at the same time, limit the amount of carbon dioxide that we can continue to emit into the atmosphere. So there's more, it's a little bit complex. So our guest panelists will be explaining all of this to us. And without much further ado, I'd like to ask Engineer Chinyere, to start her presentation, to give us an insight onto why all of these things matter, and why the goals, and how this connects to what we do in our country, and in fact globally, and how this affects our energy systems, industrialization, and economic growth. So, Engineer Chinyere, are you ready for us?
Yes, I would appreciate if David helped share this slide. So while the PowerPoint slides come up, I want to say thank you to the Energy Training Center for inviting me to speak on this topic. I think it's a timely one that we all have a responsibility and action towards. And I hope that in the course of this presentation, we find out what we can do, the steps we can take. Everybody does have a role to play. So I'll be speaking on decarbonizing energy systems, but I'll be introducing it from, understanding why we are even having decarbonization, what's the role it's meant to play. And Engineer Folabi has already gone ahead to lay that foundation for us. We'll try to understand the world as we know it right now. What's actually the impact if we continue the same way with the emissions that we currently have? Why, the what, and the how. And then we'll also look at Nigeria's energy resource so that we understand what we can do as a nation. And then we'll be focusing on a concept called people-centered energy decarbonization, because basically people are the drivers, and we need to understand the changes that need to be made, the adjustments. There are a lot of misconceptions as to what decarbonization would mean for the workforce of the future. And so if persons do not properly understand this, they may resist, the necessary change. Please go over to the next slide. So the world as we know it, you would see when the next slide comes up, basically that, currently right now we grapple with certain situations across the globe. We're dealing with droughts. We are dealing with food insecurity, supply of food across. Please, you can go back to the previous slide. So we are dealing with the issues of being able to supply food. We are dealing with sea level rise. We are dealing with instability, political instability, and this is actually affecting the supply of energy. And then we see various economies trying to be independent of, the volatile prices of oil, and then also the environmental pollution that can come from producing fossil fuels. And so the pictures right in your front just shows, the impact going on. And then if we continue this way without any action, we would not have a planet that the coming generations can actually live in, and it will not help their sustainable development. So just to give more perspective on what Engineer Falabi already said, the next slide will show us that, human beings, amongst other contributing factors, to global warming, human beings have provided the largest influence on it. And on the next slide, okay, yes, great. So on this slide, you will see that, human beings have, largely influenced global warming, and human beings have also been largely affected by global warming. And, global warming has led to all these attendant issues that I already mentioned: droughts, sea level rise, floods, storms. And so we are also looking at what is contributing to this global warming. And we'll see that, a report from EPA shows that the global gas emissions, has been largely contributed by CO2. And CO2, just if you look at the diagrams at the bottom left, you'll see the emissions by different gas sources. You have CO2 that is due to fossil fuel, and then you also have CO2 from other sources, and then you have the other gases, methane, the nitrous oxide, and the other gases that contribute to it. But we see that, CO2, particularly from fossil fuels, is contributing largely to this. And that means, for a country like ours that is heavily reliant on the production of fossil fuels and also the consumption, we do have a responsibility. And in as much as, the contribution of developing nations is not as high compared to that of developed nations, the attendant effect is on the entire globe. And so we all have a role to play. And then we also see on the other diagram that, by different sectors, the contributions to the global greenhouse gas emissions, you have the electric and heat production, you also have by industries, and then you have other sectors that are contributing to this. And why this slide is really important for us is because when we begin to talk about the actions we can take and the technologies that exist, then we can see that, those technologies will be specific to those particular sectors, to those, particular industries. And we'll later realize that, the commitments we see to the UN framework for climate change, the commitment to all the agreements that have been made thus far, including the Paris Agreement, it's by both state and non-state actors. So just on my right, you would see the causes, just outlining the causes and also the effect of human beings. And basically, if we do not continue, this has direct impact on our health. It has impact on even land. We may have to migrate, if you do have flooded cities and flooded farmlands. It's also affecting the changes even for crops, because we know that, the agricultural practices also align with the climate. So if we do have crop failure, that's also still going to impact us when it comes to food. So going still to the next slide, So we would see that in the commitments that have been recently made, especially with the last conference of parties, the 26th one that held last year, we would see that the goal, in as much as we are trying to find a solution, is not to leave anybody behind, because we find that this continent, the African continent, is still plagued by energy poverty. So this diagram basically shows, it's a 2018 data, and it shows different regions on the earth and how many persons lack electricity and currently using biomass, burning of plants, sugarcane, which in itself also contributes to the CO2 emissions. And so what this means for a country like ours, we see sub-Saharan Africa, you have 562 million people without electricity. And then you also see 916 million people that are still utilizing biomass. And the implications of this is that the contribution to CO2 via the usage of biomass will increase if we keep doing nothing. And then as population keeps increasing and we have to match the energy demands, we have to choose a source that would limit the amount of carbon we are introducing to the atmosphere. So going forward, this provides a basis for us to understand why, decarbonization is really necessary and what all this talk is all about. And so if one should ask, what is decarbonization? We are basically trying to reduce our carbon footprint because we know that, CO2 is a massive contributor to, the greenhouse gas emissions affecting, global warming and then the attendant climate change. So we are trying to reduce that carbon footprint. And just in line with the diagram that had already been shared by Engineer Folabi, the target basically is that by 2050, we are keeping, the rise at 1.5 degree centigrade. However, if we do nothing, we'll likely be getting to around 4 degrees centigrade. And so we have a massive action that needs to be taken, aggressive efforts that need to be taken across various nations, across various industries, just so that we keep the temperature low. And then I have a diagram on the left, just helping us to understand that we do have a challenge on our end, and it's quite, a tripartite challenge, which is how do we continually provide energy to the people who need it? We have lifestyle changes, we have people demanding energy, we have technology advancements, which will also thrive on energy. But how do we ensure that there is energy security to all the nations across the earth while not impacting our environment negatively and ensuring, nations, there is that energy equity, they have access to it, it's also affordable. So going forward, what are the things we can do, to decarbonize energy systems? And the list I have shown on this slide is not exhaustive. However, you would see that, and the diagram I have on the right is from the International Energy Agency, and it just basically lists various steps that we need to take to achieve our target by 2050. Some of the steps include shifting from fossil fuels, not necessarily doing out with them, but shifting from the more carbon intensive fossil fuels and then using the less carbon intensive fossil fuels, and then also utilizing alternative technology. So they have listed out varying things. And what I want to point here is basically that, there is no one pathway to achieving this, in as much as we do have proposed net zero pathways, but, various nations will have to adapt, their own pathway for achieving this. So some key things I want to mention here are, we have to ensure that we are efficient when it comes to the use of energy, and we also conserve energy. And what would that mean for us? That would require that we do have behavioral and lifestyle changes. So for persons, if you do not have to travel, for example, to attend a meeting, then you do it virtually. And what that means is if more persons are not having to utilize energy, it means that, the amount of emissions that would be generated will be lesser. So that would require behavioral lifestyle changes, energy conservation, utilizing smart systems, smart grids, being able to quantify, energy usage, and knowing how we can actually optimize our systems, our buildings, our machines, designs, also to match, the energy needs. It will also require technological advancement. We have seen a lot of advancements in the battery capacities, the ability to store, because one of the things we see with a number of our alternative energy, one of the things we see with a number of our alternative energy sources is the latency. It's not constant. For example, like solar, you don't have the sun rays shining every time, so it's not constant. Same as the wind. Use of wind turbines require a particular speed. So we have seen the advancement in, ability to store the power generated, so that during the periods when, that latency, takes place, then we can be able to utilize the stored energy. It will also mean changes in land use. We know that we had already seen a graph where we see large biomass usage. For farming, you would see lands that are, farmlands that are just, born, and we need to look for more ways to achieve, our agricultural processes without having to constantly burn biomass. It will affect construction designs. Buildings have to be more efficient. Engine designs have to be more efficient. We have a lot of industries that are quite energy intensive, and that will require redesigning the systems. Certain systems that were only based on fossil fuels may now have to be moved to hybrid. Some of them may have to accommodate, lower emission fuels like hydrogen. And so this requires a whole lot of engineering. We also have carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So because we already have CO2, and then, we cannot totally get all the CO2 away. We'll constantly have CO2 being generated. However, what we can do is to be able to track where the CO2 source is and capture it. And if we look at the concept of the net zero, it doesn't mean zero carbon. It basically means a balance. So between the carbon source and the carbon sink, you're able to capture the carbon, utilize it, and also store it. So for a country like Nigeria, where some of our oil and gas fields are becoming aging and we may have to decommission it, we can look at storing those CO2 even in underground reservoirs and fields after abandonment. It also calls for fuel switching. We have to use alternative renewable energy sources. They are listed here, which includes wind, biomass, hydrogen, geothermal, ocean energy, hydropower. A number of these technologies are mature, while some are still maturing. And so we require massive investments in this, in research and development, and so that we can have the required technologies to increase and meet our commitments. This also requires policy reforms, financial investments, more commitment shown by, our country, our companies, and personally as individuals. We also need to take responsibility towards this. So moving on, I want to just quickly share Nigeria's energy resource. And on the diagram on the left, we are able to see we have a mix of both fossil fuel and we have renewable energy sources. Nigeria is considered to be a gas province, basically. So we have an opportunity as a country also to shift to gas as a transitional fuel because it has less carbon emissions than coal and also oil. And so we have most of our deposits for hydrocarbons, just at our southeastern parts. And so that shows the concentration, the activities that take place, the production from oil and gas processing. It means we need to start implementing carbon capture systems and technology to be able to capture, these carbons that are generated. Conversely, if you look at the diagram on my right, you would also see that at the southwestern part, it shows that we have a lot of industries. And so all those industries, manufacturing industries, where you have fertilizers, cement industries, where you also have massive production of CO2, it gives the opportunity to be able to also capture this. We have opportunity, especially within the northern parts, for wind, for solar energy. And so we can utilize this to provide electric power. And I would just like to move on. So we do have potential for wind. We have potential for more solar. We have potential also for hydropower. And so as a nation, we just need to collectively, look at our infrastructure and know what more infrastructure we need to put, the necessary pipelines. If we begin to talk about CO2 capture, it means we need infrastructure for it. So the last concept I would like to share is people-centered energy decarbonization. So many people are scared. They think they will lose jobs. They think that, this change will massively impact them. But something to note here is that human beings are actually the major drivers of this energy decarbonization, and behavioral changes are needed. But also we need to upskill to match, the required skill set. However, I come bearing good news that these skill sets are already available. It's just that we need to understand the transferability of those skill sets. So, for example, somebody who understands the workings of an internal combustion engine, can also utilize that skill set where you have to start redesigning, the engines to have hybrid fuels to accommodate like hydrogen and other lower emission fuels. You have persons that need to understand how do you attract finance, because that's a very big question we need to understand. You have startups that are also supplying this technology. So you need definitely entrepreneurial skills. And all of these skills already exist within us. However, we just need to upskill and really understand how we can transfer all of the skills we already have, to the decarbonization agenda. So with this, I would like to bring this presentation to a close by stating that, yes, we all do have a responsibility as a people. If you are not actively creating awareness, one of the things we can do is to create awareness, be involved in policy reforms, advocating for this, and upskilling so that we can be able to contribute. So thank you very much. And I know we'll get so much more from the next presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Engineer Chinyere. I'm sure there will be questions. We'll attend to questions after the next presentation. Your presentation has very effectively captured what you call the trilemma, and I agree that we have as a people. And that means, yes, everything that we do, our lifestyle, industrialization, civilization, impacts on climate change. And in fact, that includes the cement industry, fertilizers, the buildings that we have, the roads, bridges, even down to the food that we eat, sometimes the clothes we wear. Everything is connected to the use of fossil fuel, and that's what's damaging our atmosphere. And then we also have the other challenge of ensuring that we grant energy access to the millions of Nigerians who don't have energy access right now, because that's directly connected to our economic growth and development. And I'm sure these are issues that Dr. Abbas will be treating during his presentation. There is a pathway, and the pathway is the solution that Dr. Abbas, are you ready for us?
Yes, Mr. Polabi, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abubakar. I will just share my thoughts regarding decarbonizing energy systems with you today. Thank you very much for making time to join us. I will try to be very brief, obviously, so that we can tailor some of the questions around questions and answers. Now, my intended presentation is targeting to look at mostly 3 to 5 things, depending on the time we have. So we will obviously look at the net carbon balance. So imagine from the COP26 countries have made a commitment to achieve net zero. I'm sure Chinyere and Mr. Apolabi have made my life easier by already giving you the in-depth understanding of what the carbon cycle and how we can achieve net zero. But I'm just going to concentrate on how we manage our energy resources. Climate policy, regulatory issues, decarbonization, and then social impact. Now, just to give insight, I'm not going to go over this slide again. I'm sure Mr. Apolabi and Chinyere have already made a significant work on this. My major point of discussion is going to be around energy, because our conversation today is how do we decarbonize our energy systems. So it's very important to say, out of the 39 gigaton per year, we do have 13 gigaton of CO2 emission is incoming directly from energy. And that's from a significant amount of emission, which we cannot overlook. Obviously, Nigeria, similar to any other countries, we have other industries such as agriculture, transport, and industry that also signify a large amount of carbon footprint. And in these conversations, we are likely going to see how do we deal with it. Now, there is a way out, and that is the good way. That is the good news. There is a way out to get out of this transition, and obviously we have undergone other transition, changing from coal to petroleum, from petroleum to gas. We have seen other energy transitions, so this is not a new thing. But the most important thing to mention is every country has a particular approach to take. So the most important thing is we don't have to copy from every other country. We have responsibility to develop our own energy transition roadmap, but we do learn from others, obviously, but it's our responsibility to really get us from where we are. But just based on the DNB-GL analysis, at the moment, the globe is only using 19% of non-fossil fuels at the moment, which means solar, wind, and every other sources of energy that we currently have. But the target is by 2050, that percentage is expected to rise to 44%. What are we saying? We are saying that we are still needing about 56% of fossil fuel sources of energy by 2050. And that simply means decarbonization does not necessarily mean moving away from oil and gas. But what it means is, how do you manage your carbon portfolio? And that is a good news to businesses, to government, and to everybody, particularly Nigeria, that is a gas-rich country. We do have a lot of advantages in this, particularly in the area of our resources, our people, and our infrastructure. And we will take a more detailed approach to it. But one thing that is important to see in this roadmap is the fact that there are a lot of changes. So it's a gradual transformation in which renewables are going to play an important part of what you call the energy mix. So one of the major things that we'll be talking about is the energy mix, and how does that energy mix help in reshaping our system. But before we move on, let us reflect back on our country, because Nigeria is the only country we have, so we have to talk about Nigeria. We have recently launched the Nigeria's Climate Act, and a lot of people really need to understand what is this act so special. There are about 78 segments of that act, and importantly is it has established what you call the National Climate Council, or National Council for Climate Change, who is going to superintend and manage activities of climate change and ensuring government commitments are achieved. That is important bedrock, apart from what the good works being done by the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Petroleum, and other ministries. Another thing is part of the act is also talking about climate resilience, multisectoral mitigation, climate adaptation, the legal framework for climate change, and the framework for achieving net zero. According to Mr. President, we are targeting to become net zero by 2060. And that is why the Act put it between 2050 to 2070. We can be there earlier, we can be there later. Doesn't matter, but what is there is the Act is there to support us. Now, what is very important to see, particularly for that Act, is the fact that there are a lot of tasks on top of the National Council of Climate Change to set targets. So countries have set targets, and our expectation is we get to look at our energy mix and see where are we now and where do we intend to be in the next 40 to 50 years. That is the most important way to look at it. Now, it's important equally to remind people that low carbon energy provides significant opportunities, obviously, simply because there are a lot of technological changes. So there will be opportunities for jobs, opportunities for economic growth, opportunities for businesses, but I will be the last person to tell you that there are no challenges. Obviously, I will never say that there will be no job losses, but equally there are job creations. But what matters importantly is your skill set that is going to determine whether you continue to be relevant in the low carbon future or you set yourself aside onto what you are doing. But importantly, one thing that we continue to tell government and businesses is make sure you incentivize low carbon future. Don't put people on obligation. People are already going through a lot. We can still see a lot of queues around petrol stations. We can still see the high rising cost of LPG in Nigeria and a lot of other things. So people are going through a lot. Now, just bringing such act as an obligation, yeah, could be a deterrent, obviously. But what is more important is government to look at regulation to be incentivizing businesses, people to be able to go carbon neutral. That is more important than making sanctions, because we have seen particularly the gas player reduction target. We have missed that target many times. Why? Simply because we only look at it as obligation and fine. And what that does is people will always, particularly businesses, will be happy to pay the fine. Let me flare the gas and let me pay the fine, because controlling the flare is more costly than the fine. So let me pay the fine, at least my business will survive. But if government incentivizes the low carbon, we are targeting to really see a fundamental change and we'll be able to see a commitment. Now, let us look at the policy around climate change. And every policy we set, as a government or as a business or as an individual, we must make sure that the energy policy achieves these three important energy trilemma, which Mr. Afolabi has already highlighted. Energy security, and that is a very important thing. We can see energy prices rising within the last 2-3 weeks simply because of Russia and Ukraine crisis. That simply means there are disruptions in the supply chain of energy, and that simply means demand has exceeded supply, and that will definitely raise prices. And particularly for Nigeria, energy security has been our greatest challenge. How we work as a government, businesses, and individuals to solve that is a serious problem that we must face and solve before we even talk about climate change. Now, the other thing is about energy access. We can see a number of people in Nigeria, large percentage do not have access to clean energy. I'm sure you have the figures, I don't have to remind you. But what is important is people are still working with non-cleaner sort pumps of energy. So unless there is access to energy that is accessible to everybody, we have an issue. And then the policy should be able to then provide incentive for the environment. Now, for that to happen, particularly in Nigeria, we look at one important thing. it's important to remind people that Nigeria, we have an unmatured energy market. And what unmatured energy market means is we are not paying the real price of energy. I have never been a proponent of saying that petrol should go from a certain price to 300 naira. No, what we are saying is let us get the actual price or the real price of energy. It's very important to say that at the current moment, one thing we see in Nigeria is a lot of power companies will tell you we have to raise the price in order to get power supplied. But the question is always, why do we have to raise the price when people are already struggling to pay what you are charging? And that is important. That simply means we get to have our regulation right. We get our market to grow. And I'm sure we can do this. A lot of countries such as Egypt, Algeria, and most of our neighbors such as South Africa managed to do that. And if we do that, we'll be able to get it right, because it's not possible to say that somebody in the UK is paying the same amount for electricity per kilowatt hour, similar to somebody in Nigeria. And you are still telling me that the energy price is too low. It's never going to happen. But obviously, this is a very limited conversation. We'll have a better opportunity to talk about this in more comprehensive manner. Now, the most important thing is giving incentive, and more importantly is funding the challenge of climate change. Somebody must fund this target of 2060 we have done. Now, the ordinary thought is government is responsible. Yeah, government will be responsible, but government alone cannot do it. And that is one thing that businesses and individuals must understand. And that is another mistake that government should never put on their shoulder, that we are going to deliver this alone through foreign loans, through other sources. No, it's going to be a challenge. The challenge we are facing of energy subsidy is going to be a child play. If we take the challenge of funding climate change, it's never going to work. So the only way out is incentivize low carbon energy, make sure you set appropriate regulatory frameworks to support market growth, to support investment, and then people will be willingly, companies will be willing to adopt low carbon future. I'm sure we don't have much time to talk about this, but we can look at it in much more clearer terms. But the opportunity is in terms of regulation. The recent PIA that came in has already given the required authorities and the commission for us to move. So, which is a very good one. But one thing that we should be aware, that government should be a protector of consumer. And that is important. Government must make sure that we don't pay excessively too much for energy. Now, but what is equally important in terms of the market is creating a competitive market for energy pricing, so that people will be able to understand, why is it a disadvantage to use LPG when I can use a CNG? Why is it a disadvantage to go for diesel when I can use natural gas? So these are some of the things which prices should be able to look into, and particularly we come across about what you call the carbon tax. So obviously, some of the energy systems that are heavy duty with respect to carbon are expected to be taxed. Whether we do it now or we do it later, it must happen for us to get to where we are getting to, simply because somebody get to fund what we are doing. And that is important. Let me just bring this up because Chinyere has talked about people-centered policies. Now, it's only in Nigeria you see, because I can afford 10 cars, I can keep 10 cars in my house. Well, obviously you are polluting the whole environment, and somebody is only having a single car, and you go through the same route. Now, the issue of decarbonization is not going to discourage people having more cars, but it's just going to create some taxation for going onto the road. So if you can afford, you pay the tax for 10 cars, and they will be able to go onto the roads, and there will be no problem. And we can see countries like Egypt, countries like UK, how difficult it is for you to be able to own more than the number of cars you require. And we are getting there. We haven't gotten there, but that will be another option. Now, in terms of the businesses, we are likely going to see a lot of changes in portfolio. We can see a lot of companies are changing from petroleum companies to energy companies. That is where we are heading to. And that is going to cause a significant transformation. We have just seen Chevron selling their shallow water wells to Seplat. We have just seen Shell trying to move to Shell Energy. So that is going to help companies to manage their portfolio into a low carbon, and that will give them an opportunity to access funding, because that is the major requirement by international funding bodies. This is, again, another topic for another day entirely. Now, another important thing is research and innovation, and that is where our institutions, our research centers, our training bodies will come in to be able to provide support for businesses to grow. Now, one of the technologies concept are around carbon capture, which already Chinyere and Mr. Apolabi have mentioned. But one thing that I will just emphasize, it is never possible to achieve net zero without carbon capture. So whatever we do, no matter how much renewables we inject, we cannot get there. Now, the major thing is African countries particularly are paying higher cost to go green for solar projects, and that is going to be more serious because our higher cost of green energy is outweighing the fossil fuels. More than 62 countries spend more on debt servicing than their healthcare, and that is a very serious issue. So we are looking at SDG number 7 for reliable, affordable, and modern energy. Now, this is just to give you an overview of the different carbon capturing mechanism for us to get there. I'm not going to go through this. It's a technology-driven ways to make sure that the total 36 to 38 gigajoule of energy is captured. But what is important, according to IEA, is that total emission can be captured over time. So according to them, by 2050 or 2070, we can get net zero by capturing carbon. I'm not going to go through the slides, but another important technology is hydrogen. We do have different sources of hydrogen, either the blue one, the gray one, but what matters is the cost. Natural gas is ranging between $4 to $5 per million BTU, but if hydrogen is going to cost $15 to $16 per million BTU, nobody is going to go to it because it's not affordable. That is even the blue one, talk less of the green one, that is going to cost between $20 to $25 per million BTU. So that is the issue of energy trilemma we are talking about. Although there are issues regarding carbon credit as well as carbon cost, which we can look at subsequently, but we get to see that this is one of the research we are currently looking at, the domestic use of natural gas versus hydrogen in domestic systems. Obviously, there are challenges because the energy content of natural gas is far more than that of hydrogen, and that is a serious issue related to costing. Now, there are other research opportunities in carbon capture, utilization of the CO2 as well as storage. I don't want to go into that, but just to tell you that our research institutions have a lot of things to do. In terms of the social, and this is where I'm ending it up, government has a huge responsibility to protect people and businesses, and that simply means by declaring decarbonization, you are creating an opportunity for energy prices to go up. It's still the same government responsibility to utilize our authority and permission to make sure that we manage that market growth so that customers pay for the right amount of energy instead of paying excessively high. We get to see that for us to manage energy, we get to make it affordable and accessible and secure to everybody. And that is important. Now, there will be job opportunities, especially for existing staff, because one of the major threats to climate change, people used to say, am I going to lose my job? Obviously, no, you may not lose your job, but you just have to make sure that you expand your skill set. The current skill set of oil and gas are never going to take us through, but what we need is the energy mix. And that energy mix will be able to understand if I shift from petrol to diesel, from petrol to natural gas or CNG, how much am I paying and what are my savings? And that is what businesses need to understand. And then obviously businesses need to go through portfolio optimization. In conclusion, decarbonization energy systems is a very important task, but we must prepare our workforce to achieve it because it requires a lot of technical, commercial, regulatory, and economic tasks, and we must retrain our workforce to achieve that. Energy security and accessibility must exist for us to achieve decarbonization, and there should be an incentive to push people towards a low carbon future instead of just creating policies that will just give the theory without incentivizing people to go. I think I have to stop here. Thank you very much, guys. I think I might have shot my time by a few minutes. Thank you very much.
That's okay, Dr. Abbas. Thank you very much for that presentation. Let me just share with the rest of listeners who are still here that there is a course that Energy Training Center is putting together on decarbonizing energy systems. You would notice that a lot of the presentations that we've heard today has so much detail in it that our facilitators cannot cover at this point. So for instance, carbon capture technology already exists, and it would require a lot of the process engineers we have, and even some who are mechanical and electrical, to reskill themselves to be able to adapt that technology to help Nigeria in meeting our net zero objective. Engineer Chinyere mentioned something. Net zero does not necessarily mean that we're not emitting any kind of carbons. It's just that we're trying to strike a balance. And also, Dr. Abbas also mentioned that we cannot achieve this net zero without carbon capture, utilization, and storage. There's a whole new economy that is evolving and developing globally around this technology. And if we in Nigeria or Africa don't align or take advantage of this, we will be left behind. With that said, I would like to encourage all of you that are listening to please sign up for this course, this Decarbonizing Energy Systems, where you can hear all of the detailed information surrounding CCUS, the policies, the regulations, a little bit of detail on the Climate Change Act that has been signed into law in Nigeria. It was signed by President Buhari in October of last year. And one of the provisions of that act would require that any company that employs more than 50 people would have to begin to track and account for their carbon emissions and report to the NCCC that Dr. Abbas mentioned. And there is a penalty for you not meeting the set carbon budget objectives and all that. There are many more. One of the other provisions is that every company would have to have someone employed that would be the person responsible for reporting to the government on their carbon footprints and all of that. So with that said, we'll now take some of the questions that have already been asked. The first question is from Engineer Chukwu Emeke, okay? And he says, good presentation. If nations are allowed to choose their transition path, why will Africa focus her energy and scarce resources to meet net zero target when her contribution is less than 3 to 4% of global emission? So I'd like to ask Engineer Chinyere to take a stab at that, and then Dr. Abbas would add to it.
Thank you very much. So that question, basically, while Africa as a continent is not contributing that much, one of the things we need to note is that the effect of global warming, it's not specific to any particular region. So it's not a respecter of country, and we do not have all those boundaries in the atmosphere. So, the impact is across board, will affect all of us. And so, we all have a responsibility. Another thing to note is that, we're a developing we have a lot of developing countries within Africa. And so it means that, in the process of providing energy, to our continent, we have capacity, to still contribute largely to these emissions. However, we must provide that energy in such a way that is, less carbon intensive. So there are projections where, for developing nations that we are going to still contribute more in the going future, but how we go about it is very important.
Thank you, Chinyere. Chinyere has already answered the question. I just want to add, I can see it's a very huge question, but I will just add to it. Thank you, Chinyere. Now, I'm sure I will be the last person to say that there is there is no politics in climate change. Obviously there are, but as Chinyere said, there are real dangers we all face as a globe, and we have to face it. And there are climate politics which we have to live with. Obviously, these are two sides of a coin. What matters is how our leaders have responded or plan to respond to climate change is what matters. Nobody is saying that we get to net zero by through one means, obviously. So we have to make sure that any route we are taking, we keep our people at heart. We don't allow people to go into abject poverty just to go into a low carbon future. But how do we do that? We must have a very rigorous and accountable government system and regulatory frameworks. And more importantly, is to understand the fact that when things are coming global, particularly, if you don't respond to it, you may be left behind in terms of financing. We can see a lot of financing being blocked by international donors because of non-commitment to climate change. Obviously, we have more damaging problem, particularly in Africa. We can see particularly insecurity is more of a threat, if I can give my personal opinion, than climate change, because people are being killed every day compared to the climate change, which takes time. But what is important is how we respond to it. So we will never become climate deniers, but our government really must respond in an appropriate manner.
Thank you, Dr. Abbas. And if I can add to that and say what Chinyere said in a different way, the reason why Africa is only contributing 2% to the global emissions, according to some school of thought, is because we're poor, because we are not developed. Like we said during this presentation, in Nigeria, for instance, over 50% of the people still don't have access to energy. That number becomes huge when you look at other African countries. And we want to improve and develop our economy. And the only way to do that is to give energy access to all of these people who do not have access to energy. By the time we start doing that, our contributions to global emissions within the current lifestyle and the pathway to industrialization will contribute much more to global warming. So the question is for us, because the consequences of climate change is not going to affect just certain parts of the world that have contributed more to global warming. In fact, some estimates, and if you look at the Nigeria's nationally determined contributions, it actually identifies Nigeria as one of the countries that will most likely face more consequences because of this climate change. There are some estimates that up to about 80,000 people may lose their lives. Most of the coastlines in Nigeria where we have would probably be impacted as a result of flood and sea level rise. People, as Chinyere has said earlier, many people would lose their ability to provide for themselves. So it is a responsible government in Africa that would look at that and strike a balance. We must address this climate change issue. So let's look at the next question. Again, Emeka says, how can Africa utilize the window of carbon justice payments proposed to effectively meet her energy needs, seeing that we currently have huge infrastructure deficit and acute energy poverty? Dr. Abbas, same question asked in a different way. Do you want to say anything to that?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Afolabi. Yeah, obviously a very good question. The carbon systems are meant to really support businesses and agencies that are unable to make to deploy the technologies by paying a certain amount. Say, for example, in Europe, currently you have to pay €50 per every ton of CO2 you have emitted. Now, particularly in Africa, we have not gotten into that stage because that carbon payment system is actually only in some of the developing countries. But we do have what you call the CDM in Nigeria, particularly Clean Development Mechanism, based on the Kyoto Protocol, that provide an opportunity for us to get some carbon credit, which is a good approach to project financing. But again, no matter how much we have done in that respect, it's not enough to say that the carbon system will be able to save us from or get us to the net zero. So we must blend it with a number of options, reducing the carbon intensity as well as deploying the carbon taxation systems. I don't know if that answers.
Okay, all right. So Chinyere, this next question is for you. One of the presenters mentioned that our agricultural sector emits a large amount of carbon. I'm trying to understand where the emittance is coming from, since the agricultural sector is still largely unmechanized or under-mechanized. Also, how will the mechanization of the sector affect the 2050 target?
Okay, thank you very much. So just to give us more perspective, so the agricultural sector does not only emit carbon, we have nitrous oxides, we have methane. And so you see that we are utilizing manure, we're utilizing fertilizers. Some of our agricultural processes also require that we burn trees, and that in itself is releasing CO2 to the atmosphere, and that is taking place, you know, across the globe. And so that's a very large contribution. In fact, the agricultural sector is a very large contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions through all those different processes, tree felling. And so that means that some of the practices we can begin to, you know, have is afforestation, where we don't have to burn biomass. We can look for other means of performing agricultural processes and helping us have good arable lands for crop production other than just through burning. Now, in terms of mechanization, what we can do is that with the introduction of, you know, smart machines, we can be able to track, you know, where all of this production of emissions is coming from, such that we can balance. So CO2 can be used for quite a number of things. Same as the other gases, CO2 is used as a refrigerant. In oil and gas is used for enhanced oil production. But we need to, our mechanized systems have to be able to be created in such a way that we can actually capture it at source. And then our engines, the way it's designed, because we are, I mean, the tractors, most of our engines, you know, they're utilizing diesel. Diesel is more carbon intensive. So while we are moving towards mechanization, we can utilize, you know, machines that are hybrid fuel, that help us use hydrogen, that help us use lower emissions. And then we can also have this move towards electrifications where, you know, we actually have more input from non-fossil fuel sources for our agricultural activities.
Thank you, Engineer Chinyere. The next question we'll take is to Dr. Abbas. Dr. Abbas, the Nemot Muili says, thank you, ETC, amazing presenters. How do we reconcile operational carbon, which energy optimization addresses, with embodied carbon, which is caused by building manufacturing?
Okay, very good question on the Nemot. There are a number of things that different countries do at different times. Take, for example, in the UK, in terms of operational carbon, I give you an example of what currently we are doing with the UK government. They look at a number, they first of all classify operational carbon as just carbon emission that is mostly kind of logistical, transportation and other emissions we use. So if you take, for example, some of such operational carbons we use in our day-to-day life, one of the things that the UK government has targeted to do was injecting 20% hydrogen into their natural gas stream by 2023. That is just next year. That simply means, as a way, since there are 23 million houses in the UK that are powered by gas, reducing the carbon content by 20% hydrogen is a significant step taken by the UK government to manage the operational carbon. But there are other parts of carbon that are involved with industry, say, for example, transportation. Now, if you take transportation, for example, UK government has already set a target to ban all diesel and petrol cars off the road by 2035. That means we are talking about just 12 years. If you have a diesel car, you are not allowed to drive it on the UK systems. Now, we are not saying that this is the same approach that every country must take. No, and that links to what I was saying previously. It's only in Nigeria that you see somebody having 10 to 15 cars all in the house. Why? Simply because you don't pay road tax. But I give you an example. I pay a monthly road tax to use my car on the UK road. I pay around 30,000 every month. That 30,000 naira equivalent is going towards funding a decarbonization system that are affecting the road systems and the railway systems. There's something with aviation industry. You see that a lot of research is now going towards how do we use hydrogen to power a plane engine. So there are a lot of options, but that is why we said our research institute, our training organizations is an opportunity for them to work closely with businesses and government to make sure we create and recreate technologies that are suitable for our economy. I hope that has answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Engineer Chinyere, what is the linkage between economic development and carbon dioxide emissions?
Okay, so thank you very much. Like we have already mentioned, especially for us on this continent, you know, when it comes to economic growth, we require energy. Literally, every single sustainable development goal that has been highlighted by the United Nations, access to food, access to, you know, healthcare, access to water, thrives on SDG 7, affordable, clean energy, right? But that energy, we do have a responsibility, like we're variously emphasized, we have a responsibility to ensure that the carbon emissions, you know, are reduced. We're able to achieve net zero such that, you know, we have an earth where we can all stay and continue our human activities. So, you know, it's actually very interlinked such that as humans, our activities, you know, to provide energy that would support, you know, our entire existence, you know, affects where the same earth. And we can now ensure that by reducing our carbon emissions, you know, we do have an environment that is not polluted, an environment that still sustains, enables us provide food, an environment that the water is clean, because, for example, CO2 can mix with water to form, you know, acid. So it is quite interlinked as to human beings' activities, you know, creating that economic growth, and then in return, you know, managing our emissions now affects us.
Okay, thank you, Engineer Chinyere. Dr. Bass, Adeyemi wants to know, while the transition path will be different for each country, and energy access is still a challenge, what approaches are practicable in ensuring efficiency and productive use of energy, Nigeria in particular, with absence of cap and trade CCUS?
Okay.
So
Now,
that question may have been answered already, but just shed a little bit more light into it. And I know it will be dealt with thoroughly during the training session.
Obviously, Mr. Apolabi. So just to respond to that, what normally happens in a holistic system, in Nigeria particularly, you see, this particular decade, we have declared it as a decade of gas, which is a very good step towards achieving a net zero carbon. But what we require is obviously moving away from heavy carbon such as coal and diesel systems to more into petrol and CNG vehicles. This is what it requires in the transportation sector. In the gas sector, we are looking at a developed infrastructure that will interconnect the north, south, east, and the west to make sure there is a connected network, which equally the government has launched the network code. So there are existing frameworks in place, but some of the major things that the government has to do is to fast track those processes to be able to come on stream, and they will be able to give us the appropriate answer of achieving low carbon systems as well as growing our economy, particularly in Nigeria. There is nothing wrong for going for a CNG car if government provided appropriate framework for it, because it's cheaper than petrol and it's safer than petrol. But the pending issue now is who is going to pay for it. So particularly government initially made a plan to pay for it, but when the costing came out, it looked excessively high and government couldn't take the burden. But what we could have done is to look at what Egypt has done. So what Egypt has done is to say, okay, government is going to pay 50% of that loan to convert your car. Say, for example, you are converting your car for 250,000. Government pay 125,000, you pay 125,000, but your 125,000 is coming through a bank. So the bank will be debiting your account maybe by 5,000 every month up to the time you make the payment. But by that time, you see that the amount of CNG savings you are making and the carbon footprint has already outweighed the amount of petrol you would have consumed over that period. And that is what we call a government strategy that will be able to target set tasks. And that is why we kept saying the National Climate Council have a huge responsibility to handle and plan a roadmap towards achieving the net zero.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abbas. Just very quickly, I want to talk to the slide that we're seeing. It's information about the training program that starts on the 14th of March. It's a 5-day program, Decarbonizing Energy Systems Training. As you can see, there's a whole lot that's packed into that program that needs to be taught in detail. Now, the information that's not there that I'd like to share is if you make payment before the 11th, which is next Friday, you get a discount. You only have to pay 200,000. So that's the early bird discount that we're offering. And this is just for those of you who are here on the platform. It's not available to everybody else. Now, going back to the chat, there's a comment here by Adejumoke Akimbusoye, responded to the issue about cap and trade. And she said, or he said, a cap and trade mechanism is to be introduced soon as provided for in the 2021 Climate Change Act. Deficits exist in technology for CCUS. And then she asked the question is about the people-centered energy transition, which Princess discussed. How can this work where we have a situation in which plans and programs by the government are not often readily available to members of the public? For example, an energy transition plan was set to be unveiled in COP26. That document has not been made publicly available. Energy planning is a challenge, and even worse is that the average citizens are not often carried along or sensitized. So let me address that. The truth is, the energy transition plan is actually publicly available. The challenge we have in Nigeria is many people don't know where to get the information. Nigeria's nationally determined contributions is available on the Ministry of Environment's website. And you'll notice if you read through all that information, a lot of the government policies that we're now seeing, for instance, the decade of gas and the plan to transition to CNG for automobile, what we call autogas, is all derived from that plan. By the way, there are over 200 countries in the world, and 192 of them have signed on to the climate change challenge, which has become international law. And that's why you have the NDCs that are being submitted by every country, 192 of them, that addresses how they're supposed to plan and manage this energy challenge. And I think every 6 months thereabout, I may be wrong about that, they update that information and submit new information. So yes, the information is publicly available, but I do agree with you. The citizenry is not always carried along. Dr. Abbas has said, the problem is not governments alone. Every one of us, we have a responsibility, just like Engineer Chinri also said. So for instance, you can, right now there is gas or petrol scarcity rather in Nigeria. Dr. Abbas, you're not affected about this. How fortunate you are.
I am.
But the truth is, in a situation where we have scarcity of petrol, you can actually currently, LPG is another source of fuel that you can use to drive your cars. There are conversion kits available for you to convert your cars into a hybrid one where you can use LPG and petrol. So if there's scarcity of petrol, just begin to use LPG to move around. It'll save you a lot of money too. So that's one solution. Another solution, I think Chinri also mentioned, or Dr. Abbas, we don't all have to have 3 or 4 cars. We don't have to have diesel generators. We can use renewable energy, solar power to power, to provide energy for all of our needs. So those are some of the things, little things that each and every one of us can do to help contribute, because the contribution to greenhouse gas emissions by individuals where government does not have control over is huge. For instance, Lagos State came up with new energy policy, and in one of the documents, they said the supply of electricity to Lagos State is about 800 megawatts, but about 5,000 megawatts is generated by Lagos from industry and individuals using diesel generators. You can imagine that much electricity generation, and all of that is contributing toward greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the information on that. So having said that, we've run out of questions. Emmanuel Ikoro wants to know if there is any policy or framework guiding electric vehicle in Nigeria. You can Google that on the Ministry of Environment's website. There was one person who had their hands up. I want to give him a chance to speak, and we'll wrap up with that. Moses, I think it was. I don't know if he's still here. I think he's left. Okay. All right. Thank you very much to everyone, and I hope we've learned 1 or 2 things in this presentation. Again, I want to reiterate, if you're an engineer, you're a policymaker, you work for the regulatory agencies, please sign up for the class. It's a whole lot more detailed, particularly talking about the new job skills, the technology that's required for carbon capture and storage, which we would need to help us reach that net zero objective. So with that, I'd like to bring this to a close and say thank you to facilitators, Dr. Abbas from the UK and Engineer Chinri right here in Nigeria. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.